Hello and welcome to the Dreamforce 2016 Developer Forest session, The Future of Real-Time Integration from OData to OMG. My name is Casey Clayton. This is my seventh Dreamforce, first time getting a chance to speak to you folks, so I really appreciate the opportunity and I appreciate your time. We're going to start off with our session agenda. First thing we're going to do is do a little introduction of Informatica and of myself, why I'm here, why we're here. We want to be able to talk a little bit about Salesforce integration patterns in general to understand the context of where OData fits into the mix here. Then we're going to get into things. We're going to start off with a demo, starting with what we call our DIY OData, get a database published and exposed into Salesforce. And then, as promised in the title, the OMG. And following up with some next steps after that. If you have any questions, we'll perhaps have some time to get to those. Well, why don't we start here? Informatica, why we're here, why I'm here. My name is Casey Clayton. I'm the real-time solution specialist with Informatica. I'm recently over to Informatica, was a customer of the product prior, and have a background, in working with Salesforce solutions. And so why Informatica is here is, we're the number one in Salesforce integration in terms of market share, in terms of API volume. We've got a number of happy customers. We've got industry-leading renewal rates, and we have connectors to all the leading applications, both in the cloud and on-premise. There's also a wide variety of products, both for certain niche scenarios and wide and varying data solutions and data quality problems, but we're going to spend time today talking about our cloud application integration, which is going to give us the ability to access data and external sources without having to duplicate it or replicate it into Salesforce. Now, all of us may not be as far along in our Salesforce integration strategy as the most interesting man of the world is, but it's important to know what options are available when it comes to getting at and in to your data from Salesforce and other applications. So we'll start with stuff that we're probably all well aware of, our copy and sync options, the stuff that actually moves the data between two systems to make sure that each one has a copy so that the users that are using each system can see it. And standard patterns for getting those into Salesforce include data loader, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, loading that lead file in, perhaps on a one-time basis. There's also, and very common, scheduled or batch transformations, getting your accounts and contacts between NetSuite and Salesforce on a nightly basis, or whatever your ERP of choice might be. And finally, there's event-driven type orchestration, where things actually can happen in real time, where an opportunity is closed in one system, gets copied to another to create a sales order, creating an entire opportunity to cash type process. But truly what we're here to talk about today is these request and response patterns where the data doesn't actually have to live within Salesforce for the users to see it. And so OData and API, real-time access to external data, either through external objects, as we'll see, or components, as we'll see as well in the demonstrations that we're about to go through. So to copy or not to copy? That is the question that a lot of Salesforce, not just the administrators, but truly the executives and the folks that are paying the bills for Salesforce need to make decisions about copying data into Salesforce, because these rows aren't free. So deciding what data needs to appear in Salesforce can involve many factors, but here are a few rules of thumb that I have for our customers and have learned from my experiences. When you need to copy data into Salesforce, it's required by workflow or assignment rules or list views. People are working with it in Salesforce. They need to be able to see it. So you should be copying it into Salesforce so they can do their jobs. Also, if you're running reports out of Salesforce on the data, or you're combining it perhaps with accounts or contacts or opportunities with custom report types, it's important that you would actually copy that data into Salesforce. So, so when not to copy data into Salesforce? If the data is changing constantly and it's really important to have the most current information, I think you're talking account balance or inventory levels or up to the minute transactions, it might not make sense to have this stuff get copied into Salesforce, on even in a small batch basis, because this information changes too often and it might be tied to other sensitive information that you'd prefer to keep behind the firewall. Or you have a large amount of historical data, perhaps from a system that you're migrating from, and you're concerned about the storage costs of moving all that into Salesforce, the ability to access that data without having to copy it into Salesforce. There's some incentive to do that there. Well, as the late great Gene Wilder poses, you may have database table and you do want to get it into Salesforce, and Salesforce tells you this is absolutely possible. But let me know how far you get without OData. So we're going to start here with a little demonstration around DIY OData and how you can use Informatica Cloud application integration to expose a legacy database or any relational data source you have to Salesforce users. But before we get into that, here's our obligatory OData overview. So what is OData? I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I stole this one from the Wikipedia, where it says that it's a REST-based protocol for querying and updating data. It is different from other REST-based services in that it provides a uniform way to describe both the data and the data model. And so this is important, at least for us and at least for Salesforce, because it means that we can take this database that we have, that has certain fields and data types, and we can actually turn this into a web service, something you could get at from, even a simple URL or via an application that knows how to read the data that comes in the OData format. So, what can I do with OData? I can expose my database tables to other applications without having to write any code. It's as simple as that. And why is OData a hot topic here, in the developer forest, at Salesforce in general? Well, because Salesforce Connect. It's a really simple way out of the box to be able to expose external database tables as objects that you can relate to accounts and contacts and other things that you're used to working with every day within Salesforce. All right, so the first demo we're going to show today is going to be an OData external object setup example. We're going to take a database table that exists on a server that would be behind a firewall. We're going to generate an OData URL endpoint from this particular database that can exist in the cloud. We won't have to open up any holes in the firewall. Then we're going to use that URL to create an external data source within Salesforce, and then finally take a certain table from that data source, expose it as an external object that will be related to the account. And we'll walk through how to do all the setup so you'll be able to see this thing end to end. So let's go ahead and hop into Salesforce. I'm going to start here on this Salesforce account page. Now, Informatica Cloud has a managed package. It installs into your Salesforce org to give you access to certain things like our real-time designer. And so we're going to go into the guide designer here to take a look at our connection to the database. So the database that we're trying to get at here, if I can show you in my little terminal, exists on this server that's behind a firewall, and it's got a handful of tables on it, including this VIN data table. So you can see it contains a vehicle identification number, a year, make, and a model. A VIN is a standard way to identify a vehicle. So this is the data that we're going to bring in. Now you can see here this particular source actually does have a Salesforce ID on it. We're going to use this to relate it to the account. Now you can actually use other fields, external IDs that might exist on there as long as they're on the Salesforce record as well. Here we are within Informatica Cloud that's existing inside of a custom tab within Salesforce. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at the connection that we have to this database. With Informatica Cloud, we use JDBC connector to get at your Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, Azure databases. You'll just go ahead and drop in the connection URL that you may be familiar with, and go ahead and provide a username and a password, and you're able to publish this connection where it'll show the various tables that exist within, and you even get a chance here to preview the fields and some of the data that exists within that data source. So, but what we want to see here and what I want to show you is with this radio button here, we can also make this database an OData endpoint or a data source that we can incorporate within Salesforce. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OData yes and publish. And then we're going to go ahead back to our Design Home tab, and you'll see that we have generated this OData service URL for our data source. So let's go and get into the Salesforce setup and see if we can do something with this thing. I'm going to click here. We're going to go to the Setup Home. And no different in Classic or Lightning. You would just search here in the setup for external data sources. You can see we've got a connection set up to an Azure database that has an OData provider. This legacy SQL, MySQL absolutely did not, so we needed to be able to generate an endpoint in order to be able to incorporate it within Salesforce. So we're going to call this external external data source our Dreamforce 16. The type here is going to be OData 4.0. We support read and write with OData 4.0, so you'll actually be able to update this data as long as you have the appropriate permissions on the user that you use to publish the connection. So we're going to paste the URL that we got from Informatica Cloud here, right here in the URL line, and then we're going to go ahead and secure it with a user that is set up within Informatica Cloud. We do use SAML and have SSO type integrations, so you're able to secure these sorts of connections. In this case, we're going to use the password authentication. I'm going to provide the API user that we've designated for this purpose, username and password. And we'll go ahead and hit save. Now that that's saved, we want to verify that the connection exists and go ahead and bring in the data table that we want to bring in. By hitting the validate and sync button, it'll actually reach out to the data source. Looks like our connection's good because we're bringing in that list of tables that we've seen. The one that we're interested in this case is the VIN data table, so we'll select that there and hit the sync button. Now that's all it takes to create this external object within Salesforce. The external object exists. You can create a tab for it so you can go visualize it, but in this case we're going to actually use the fact that there's information in the table that can relate this to a Salesforce object, to show it on the account page to make it useful perhaps to our end users. Not necessarily show them how to use it or what it's for, but at least put the data on the page. So we'll hit edit here. You can see now that these are all the fields that existed in that database table that I showed you before. So there's VIN, make, model, year, and then of course that related account field. And so what we want to do in order to make this visible on the account page is we're going to create a lookup relationship, the standard lookup relationship that we're familiar with. We'll just select data type lookup, and we're going to say this is going to be related to the account record. And now defining the lookup, within Salesforce you would just need to give the field a name. We will just call this account, and then you just give it the name of the column in the database that actually contains the Salesforce account ID. So in this case we have it called related account. This will go ahead and set up the relationship within Salesforce. Whether or not you want certain profiles to be able to see this related list. It'll update the layout for that object and the related lists on the account as well. So that's helpful to us. If we can go ahead and hit save here, we are all set up. We've created our external object, we've related it to the account, and now let's go ahead and see if we can put it on that account page. Well, let's see, on our related lists component, if we scroll down, we can actually see, there we go, there's our VIN data that's come in. Now, these aren't the most useful fields that we're seeing. If we want to make this a little bit more useful to us, we can always edit the page layout. Edit page. This will take us to, if you're using the Lightning experience, the Lightning app builder. But fear not, in terms of adjusting how your related lists appear within the Lightning experience, you'll find it pretty familiar. We'll actually just we'll select this related lists, and it's going to direct us to the account page layout editor, which we should be familiar with in terms of creating pages in Classic. And you'll actually just scroll down to find the related list. Remember, we called this one VIN data. We can hit the little wrench, and we can decide what fields we want to appear. So let's say we want the VIN, the year, make, model, and mileage. So I've inserted those in there. I'm going to hit save here. and then we're going to go ahead and go back to our little Lightning app builder, hit save, hit back, and now with Lightning Experience, to get it to reinitialize the page after an edit, you just hit the refresh button, and we should be able to see the results of our labor. If I scroll down here into this VIN data section, all right, yeah, there's the external ID, display URL, VIN, vehicle year, as they're coming across. So, and here's the entire data set. So now you notice it's not every row within our VIN data. It's only the ones that are related to this particular account record. So we were successful in rendering that external object. External data objects are a start, right? You've seen a great way to access data. It didn't require a line of code. We were actually able to do it in less than 10 minutes, and we able to get that data onto the page. But you can see how easy it might be to get these page layouts cluttered with even more obscure related lists that many of your users won't need to use, and some will need to use but not know where to find without additional training. They aren't directed how to use the data in the context of a business process. And then also, what if you need to use this external data to create or update existing objects, custom objects you've created, or just to enrich your account or contact, based on synchronizations from other systems. OData cannot really be easily combined with other data sources, and if you want to work with APIs, traditionally it's going to require some Apex code in order to interact with REST or SOAP. But don't just take it from me. All right, as promised, the OMG. We're going to go ahead and take a look at what else we can do in terms of real-time connections to data. We'll be able to incorporate not just the database source that we saw, but perhaps some REST-based API data, and talk about a new way that we can present this to end users. So here we go. Moving beyond external objects with real-time guides. Now really what this is about is eliminating the swivel chair for your Salesforce end users. And not just by creating external objects and increasing the amount of training, but actually designing guides that can step users through your system spanning business processes. So whether the data lives in Salesforce or not wouldn't necessarily be relevant to the end user. And so you can publish these new real-time integrations in less time, and also they're not tied to a Salesforce release. And we're also looking at codeless connectivity to OData or JDBC, REST, and SOAP with no Apex required. So let's talk about a demo here. But so first, for our demo, we're going to need a scenario, and here's the business scenario. A customer calls to notify us that her company is a newly acquired vehicle that they wish to register with their account. Now, perhaps we're an insurance company, or we register delivery vehicles. In our case, we have an information about vehicles set up in a custom vehicle object that we relate to the account. And so we'll use a VIN number provided by the customer to retrieve data in real time. We actually have an on-premise database of VINs, as you saw earlier, that VIN data information. So we're going to use the data from the customer on the phone. We're going to access that database, and then we're going to also throw in a call to a web-based REST API, Edmunds.com. In this case, they're a provider of vehicle information services. So let's talk about the process. Our end user, somebody in a call center, for example, would start from the account record. They'd get the VIN from the customer, and they'd find it in the list of VINs we have from the database. They're going to get that information and either use what's there or create a new one. We're also going to make a call out to Edmunds.com via the REST API to get the city mileage and highway mileage that are going to actually go onto the record that we create. And finally, we're going to get a couple more pieces of information from the actual person, and we're going to create the vehicle record in Salesforce related to the account. So here, back within Salesforce, back within the Informatica Cloud Guide Designer, I'm going to go ahead and just go up here to New. And we're going to go ahead and create a new guide. And this guide is going to be what's going to appear on our account page layout. And we'll show you here, at least briefly, where this data can live. If we come back to the account and we take a look at our account record, you can see that this information can be placed as a Visualforce component that can either live below your details, or as a standalone tab in any page layout, or on a mobile device. So we're going to publish our process into this space, and we're going to do it with our guide designer, and we're going to go ahead and start here. We're going to give this process a name. We're going to call this one the Add Vehicle Guide, Call Center Guide. And this will be going to apply to a Salesforce account. Now, you can actually launch these sorts of guides from any record, account, contact, or a custom record, for example. The context of where you launch the guide is actually going to drive the experience of the user. So we're just going to say this is associated to the account. We're going to provide a description here: guide to add vehicle record in Salesforce using data from our database and a web service. We're going to give it a quick tag to keep things organized. We already have this OMG tag, so it automatically suggests that. So to get going, we're just really going to need to think about the information that we're going to want to get from our user. One of those bits of information would be perhaps if they have a new VIN number that they want to be able to add. This would be a simple text field. And then we're also going to create a field that's actually going to stand in for our connection to the database, our DB VIN data, as that table was called. And we define that here just by giving it a type. In this case, it's going to be an object. We're going to find that Dreamforce MySQL connection, and then we're going to just select VIN data. And then that's all we need to do to get started. You'll be able to see you can actually show and hide these guides based on any field available on the account record or a related record. So you get a lot of flexibility, more than just record type and profile, about the process guides that are available to your end users. But let's get into the design experience. So here we have our start step and our basic properties. We're going to go in and say, here in our initial step, we're going to say, welcome to the Add Vehicle Guide. Going to give ourselves a little bit more space to work with here. We're going to say we want to display the account name and perhaps the account owner here, just to make sure that we have that information available. And then we also want to go ahead and perhaps maybe allow the user to edit something. So perhaps if we can say insert field for update, we could go account type. So that will be available there. And so for these fields, for account name and account owner, all we have to do is go insert read-only field and say account name. And in this case, the account owner, we want to show the full name. So we would go through and not just grab the owner ID, but we'd go up to the owner record and grab the full name. If we wanted to, we could actually go and go to the manager and get the manager's full name, but in this case we just want the owner's full name. And you could do this to get access to any related record of value on those fields, so you don't have to create a lot of formula fields or do a lot of SOQL to create a page that has the information from various objects to display to your end user. So we can go ahead and make this nice and bold, give it a little image. But now we're going to get down to what this thing needs to do. So here we're going to say, please ask customer to provide new VIN here, and we'll drop this insert field for update for that new VIN that we had set up. Here, we'll stretch this out. Or select from the list below. So when we say select from the list below, we're actually talking about the database table, the same VIN data that we saw as exposed earlier as an external object. But in this case, we're actually going to allow the user to see the data, select a record, and use the data from that record to continue on in our business process. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and select insert field for update, and I'm going to look for my DB VIN data. Now, somewhat unassuming here at first, if we drill into the properties of this particular field, you'll see that we actually can access and select from all the different fields that are on that database table. So year, make, model, perhaps mileage. Will allow filtering within the results, and then here we can specify, a query that actually bring back the data. If we leave it blank, for no conditions, we can, bring back every record. If we want to say, hey, we only want ones where the vehicle year equals, say, 2004, we can insert that criteria here in that spot, and that's the only thing that will come up. So we're just going to ask the user either to enter new VIN or select from list and select from list. That's really all we need here. And then we'll just give the options. So use new VIN, use selected VIN, and then we can just say, end call. You always need that option. We're going to apply these, and you can see these options now appear here in the Guide Designer. I can go ahead and hide this tab, and you can see as this thing begins to flow out, we have a whole series of options for our user. Now, if we say, hey, we want to use the new VIN that they've given us, we can actually use this tool to create the record within the database. Say I want to create a new VIN data table, and I want the input for the VIN and the year, make, and model to be able to come from the screen. So just the user is going to provide all this information. Actually, and we'll just say enter VIN info to add to database, VIN year, make, and model. And then we can actually pre-fill this VIN number here with the default value of that new VIN that we entered on the previous page. So you can allow a user to edit or just go ahead and use the default. So, all right, so we're done with this here. We've gone ahead and created this new VIN data record in our database, and we can actually, at this point, just tell the user to jump back so that they can select it from the list. So we're going to jump back to enter new VIN or select from list. Now, if we use the selected VIN, we just want to make sure that we display the right data. End call is simply that, end call. We'll say that this is an end, and we'll just not show the screen, and we'll refresh the current object. So that's the end of our process there. Now, if we're going to use this VIN number that we've just pulled up, let's go ahead and display the information to the user and perhaps allow them to edit the mileage. So we're not going to create a new record. We're going to use this existing record to create the vehicle record within Salesforce. So review DB vehicle information. And so we're going to drop a few fields on here, read only, like our DB VIN data VIN, our DB VIN data year, DB VIN data make, and DB VIN data model. We'll give them labels here so that the user will know what they're working with. VIN, year, make, model. This bold here, and then we'll also allow them to edit the mileage. So we'll go DB VIN data and mileage, and because it's related to this database object, any changes made here would actually be entered into the database as they move forward, or rolled back if they need to go backwards in the history. So we're at a point now where actually, we've interacted with that database data. It seems like, maybe a couple of more steps than, just showing it as an external object. But when we talk about the ability to interact with the data, now we've seen this information that's coming from the database. We don't just want to see it, we want to use it to create an object. And before we even get there, we actually need to now pull information from a web service. So in this next step here, we're going to change the step type over to a service call. So with Informatica Cloud Real-Time, we give you the ability to codelessly consume REST and SOAP REST-based APIs. So the one that I'm using in this example is one that's provided by Edmunds.com. It's a REST-based API, and so we've taken a few actions that they provide and then configured it to just simply take in an input like a vehicle ID. We paste the URL that they give us in the API instructions in here, and we're actually able to test the call to the web service, see the results that come back, and then slice and dice out any element of the response so that the user can use it within the process, that just like we're going to see here. So if I say I want to use a service call to the Edmunds API and to get vehicle by VIN, you see it's going to expect this vehicle ID in, and then it's going to provide me information such as the MPG city and highway that I need. And once this information exists in the process, you're able to use it any step along the road. You don't actually have to work and add code to every system along the way to make sure that they persist this information. This stateful process will keep track of the records that you've created, requested, and worked with along the way. So it feels a lot more like the business process that somebody from the business would describe to you. I'm going to select here for our vehicle ID input. I'm going to go to field, and then I'm going to go to DB VIN data. VIN, so we're actually going to use the VIN number that we've pulled back from the database into this next step, this web service call. And now we just want to display this information to the user. So review web service, and then we can, let's drop in the Edmunds. If I start searching here, there we go. There's the MPG city and the Edmunds MPG highway. So we'll say highway here, city here. We'll make this bold. We'll drop in another little image to snazz it up and remind us where we're actually getting this data from, this external source. All right, now last but not least, we need to go ahead and create that record, that vehicle record within Salesforce. So similar to what we saw with the database, we would use a create type step, and we say I want to create a Salesforce. Now we can create it, in this org or even another Salesforce org if the use case required, but in this case we're going into our Salesforce org and we're going to create a vehicle. The account ID is automatically populated. You can see it knows about all the fields on this vehicle record that we have within Salesforce. So all I have to do is go ahead and populate them from what I know. So our vehicle identification number, for example, we need the year, we need the make, we need the model. We're also looking to get the MPG city, the MPG highway, and then we also want to collect the DMV info like registration, state, license plate, and description. Now what's unique about this solution is we can pull these from the various sources that we've used along the way. So our vehicle identification number is going to go ahead and come from the DB VIN data VIN. Great. As is our year, make, and model. So we'll get all this stuff from the database. You can see the mapping coming together, some fields from the database like this year, make, and model. And then we're also going to grab the information for the MPG city and highway. So I'm going to go ahead and update this, and we're going to say we want the Edmunds MPG city. Great, that was easy enough. And then Edmunds MPG highway, absolutely. And now we're going to collect these last three fields actually from the person we're on the phone with, as you recall. So I want to say screen, screen, screen. And it reminds us which fields we said that we wanted to gather from the screen. So we'll say we want the registration state, the license plate, and description. Again, I'm going to hit save, and we're going to be done here. We're going to get rid of this step, and we're going to say this is the end of our process. Now, unlike the other end, which is just the quick bailout, we do want to go not to the current object, but to the new vehicle record we created. So you can see now that it exists after that create step, that created vehicle record C. I'm going to go ahead and save, and let's make this guide live for our end users. So as I showed you before, we've got this little space here that's got these various guides that you can see, can provide some useful actions reaching out to to data and other sources, but let's say we're ready to launch this new business process. We got a new business process ready to go. We just want to get it out and available to our end users in Salesforce. So here, since we've assigned this to the account object, we'll hit publish. Now by publishing this guide, it will actually make it active and appear within this space, because this space is controlled by metadata that lives within InformaticaCloud.com. I'm going to refresh the page. We're going to cut over to Realtime Guides, and lo and behold, OMG, there's our Add Vehicle Call Center guide. All right, it's time to play the part of the end user. I'm sitting in the call center. I'm ready to answer the phone to help my customer out. The customer says, hey, I need to add a vehicle to my account. And so, another process would perhaps be to go down and look at the VIN data information and then go and create a new record and transcribe that information, tabbing back and forth. But here we're going to make it nice and easy for our end user with a custom process guide that we built here in about 10 or 15 minutes. So there's our account name, account owner, and account type as we specified. We're actually able to edit the account type here. So if you only want the user to be able to edit one or two fields on a given record at a given time, this is a great way to do this without creating new record types, profiles, page layouts. Now remember, our process was to either provide a new VIN number or to select from this list that's drawn in real time from the database. And as you recall, we filtered it to only include stuff from 2004. This is the data that lives over here. We're going to filter within it a little bit. We're going to look for, say, a Mercedes. So these are the ones. This is that C class that we're looking for. This is the vehicle. It exists in the on-premise system. So we're going to proceed with using the selected VIN. Now in this next step, we show the VIN number, the year, make, and the model. We get maybe the updated mileage from the end user, so we'll correct it here. This will update the record in the database as well as use it for the record we're about to create here. Now, not to overshadow what just happened, we just talked to a database in real time and updated information within it. Now we've made a web service call to a REST-based web service that lives out in the cloud, bringing in information that's relevant to our record, to our customer, to our end user, allowing them to see it, using it to make a decision, moving on. So now we're going to provide this last information. Here's our registration state here, our license plate, ABC and 1, 2, 3, and finally a description here. Let's say our customer in this case refers to vehicle as Brad. Don't ask me why. So we're going to continue this, and at this point actually take the end user to the newly created vehicle record within Salesforce. So you can see we brought in the year, make, and model from the database. We didn't have to enter those by hand. The mileage per city, city and highway. No more swivel chair to another system to do that lookup. Here's the information we got from the end user, and we've created this record within Salesforce. OMG, what did I just see, right? This is the question that I hope at least you're asking, because I want to be able to say and show you that what you saw is very real and was built in real time and works with real-time data. So with the tool, the Process Guides tool, business subject matter experts can create process guides to walk end users through system-spanning business processes. Now, these visual force-based components can display on page layouts in Lightning or Salesforce Classic and on mobile devices. The same guide will run on a mobile device or in Salesforce Classic with no modifications. It's possible to incorporate data from both database and API sources without writing any code. So we were able to get access to that admin service that didn't have an OData provider, never will, and be able to incorporate that into a business process. Now, fine control over the connections that you have lets you keep sensitive data behind the firewall. Now, when you work with OData and you're sending database records in their entirety up to Salesforce, there is a chance that some of that information may be sensitive. Now, with fine-grained control over a connector, as you saw in these process guides, you only need to expose the couple fields that are relevant to the user rather than the whole row. So there's a certain amount of security things to keep in mind when it comes to OData. We allow you to control at a finer level that data that gets out, and it does give you this seamless access to data in the cloud. And each of these endpoints doesn't require their own external data source connect license. To use the OData and external object, that's absolutely true, but the guided process you saw wasn't reliant on the external data source license. So, um, just as an example of what other organizations are doing with real time, they're connecting to multiple Salesforce orgs and synchronizing them. They're talking to their ticketing systems, their ERPs, in any way, shape, or form, in whatever size, whether they're on premise or in the cloud, and they're working with the latest cloud infrastructure like Amazon Web Services to make sure that we can respond to events and help you scale into the cloud in whatever direction that you're headed. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I hope you found this interesting and appreciate any feedback you may have. Thank you very much.